the Kennedy family. For over a century, their name has been synonymous with power, ambition, glamour, and tragedy. They are America's unofficial royal family, and their history is a grand, sweeping narrative, carefully crafted and fiercely protected. In this story, the women who marry are expected to play a role, to be supportive, beautiful, to raise the next generation of leaders, and above all, to be loyal to the dynasty. But what happens when one of these women refuses to be a silent chapter in someone else's book? What happens when she is not just divorced, but faces the threat of being erased entirely from the family's official history? This is the story of a woman you may have never heard of, or have long since forgotten. She was not a political operative or a socialite. She was a quiet scholar, an architect, and a mother. For 12 years, she was a Kennedy. She gave the family its next direct male heir descended from Robert F. Kennedy, and then she was cast aside. But when the family and the Catholic Church tried to retroactively declare that her marriage had never truly existed, she did something unthinkable. She fought back, publicly. This is the story of Sheila Rauch Kennedy, the ex-wife of Joseph P. Kennedy II. It is a story about a private life colliding with a public dynasty, a story of personal faith being shattered by institutional power, and a story of one mother's fierce, desperate battle to ensure she would not be written out of her own life and out of the history of her sons. To understand Sheila Rauch's story, we must first understand the world she married into. The late 1970s was a period of transition for the Kennedy clan. The golden age of Camelot was a fading, painful memory. The assassinations of President John F. Kennedy in 1963 and Senator Robert F. Kennedy in 1968 had left a deep, permanent scar on the family and the nation. The tragic accident at Chappaquiddick in 1969 had effectively ended Senator Ted Kennedy's presidential ambitions. The great patriarch, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., was gone. The family matriarch, Rose, was aging. The weight of the world and the immense burden of the Kennedy legacy now fell upon the third generation, the children of JFK, RFK, and their siblings. At the forefront of this generation was Joseph P. Kennedy II, the eldest son of Robert and Ethel Kennedy. Born in 1952, Joe grew up under an almost unimaginable shadow. His father was his hero, a political icon whose life was cut short at the moment of his greatest promise. From a young age, Joe was seen not just as a son, but as a political heir. The public, the media, and perhaps the family itself looked to him to carry the torch, to continue the work, to one day reclaim the power and promise of his father's generation. He was handsome, charismatic, and possessed the famous Kennedy Drive. He founded the nonprofit Citizen Energy Corporation in 1979, using his name and connections to provide low-cost heating oil to the poor and elderly, a move that was both genuinely altruistic and politically savvy. This was the world Sheila Rauch was about to enter. It was a world of immense wealth and privilege, but also one of public expectation, constant scrutiny, and deep, unresolved grief. It was a world where personal lives were political, and where the Catholic faith was not just a religion, but a core part of the family's Irish-American identity and political brand. It was a world that demanded loyalty above all else, a world that had its own rules, and one that did not suffer outsiders or dissenters gladly. Sheila Rauch was, in every sense of the word, an outsider. Sheila Brewster Rauch was born on March 22, 1949, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her life began in a world that was, in its own way, as privileged as the Kennedys, but operated on a completely different frequency. She was not part of an Irish Catholic political dynasty. She was a daughter of the Protestant establishment, the so-called mainline aristocracy of Philadelphia. Her family was wealthy, respected, and valued privacy and quiet achievement over public charisma. Her father, Rudolph Stewart Rauch, was the president and chairman of the Philadelphia Consolidated Brick Company. The Rauchs were Episcopalians, a faith rooted in a different tradition, with different rules and a different culture than the Catholicism of the Kennedys. Sheila was raised in a world of stability, intellectual curiosity, and dignified reserve. She was studious and serious-minded from a young age. She attended the prestigious Agnes Irwin School in Rosemont, Pennsylvania. Unlike the Kennedy children, who were raised in the chaotic, competitive rough and tumble of Hyannisport, Sheila's upbringing was more structured and academic. She had no interest in politics. Her passion was for art, history, and the way buildings and cities shape human lives. This passion led her to Boston College, where she pursued her studies. After graduating, she began working as a staff assistant at the architectural firm of F.A. Stahl and Associates in Boston. It was here, in the professional world of blueprints and urban planning, that her path fatefully crossed with that of the Kennedy dynasty. In the late 1970s, her firm was hired to work on the headquarters for a new nonprofit organization, Joseph P. Kennedy II's Citizens Energy Corporation. Sheila Rauch and Joe Kennedy met not at a glamorous party or a political fundraiser, but in a professional capacity. She was the architectural planner. He was the client. He was immediately taken with this intelligent, poised, and articulate woman who was so different from the world he knew. She was not a political groupie. She was a serious professional with her own career and her own distinct identity. Their courtship was relatively quick. On February 3rd, 1979, they were married in a civil ceremony. The union of the Episcopalian scholar from Philadelphia and the Catholic political heir from America's most famous family was a significant event. It was a joining of two very different types of American aristocracy. For Sheila, life as a Kennedy wife was an adjustment. She was now part of a sprawling, boisterous clan with its own ironclad traditions and expectations. But she deliberately carved out her own space. She did not try to become a carbon copy of the other Kennedy women. She remained intensely private and continued to pursue her academic interests. While Joe was building Citizens Energy and laying the groundwork for his political career, Sheila was focused on her studies and starting a family. On October 4th, 1980, Sheila gave birth to twin sons, Matthew Rauch Kennedy and Joseph P. Kennedy III. This was a moment of immense significance. She had delivered the next generation. Joseph III was the first male grandchild of Robert F. Kennedy, a direct heir to the political line. Sheila had fulfilled the most important duty of any woman who married a Kennedy. She had produced the heirs to carry the name forward. For the next decade, Sheila dedicated herself to raising her sons and continuing her academic work. She completed a master's degree in theological studies at Boston College. She tried to provide a stable, normal life for her boys, away from the harsh glare of the political spotlight that was increasingly focused on her husband. In 1986, Joe Kennedy was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, taking the same Massachusetts congressional seat once held by his uncle, John F. Kennedy. With Joe in Washington, the pressures on the marriage intensified. The life of a political wife was not one Sheila had sought or particularly enjoyed. She preferred the quiet life of a scholar and mother in their Boston home. Meanwhile, rumors about Joe's conduct in Washington began to circulate. The marriage, which had joined two very different worlds, began to fracture under the strain of politics, public life, and alleged infidelity. After 12 years of marriage and 2 children, the end came. In 1991, Joseph P. Kennedy II and Sheila Rauch Kennedy were legally divorced. The proceedings were painful but handled with a degree of privacy. Sheila received a settlement and continued to raise her sons. It seemed to be a sad but not entirely uncommon end to a high-profile marriage. Sheila, now no longer a Kennedy, intended to retreat back into the quiet, private life she had always preferred. But she had underestimated the lengths her ex-husband and the institutions loyal to him would go to rewrite their shared history. A few years after the civil divorce, Sheila was living her life quietly in Cambridge, Massachusetts, when she received a letter that would upend her world and launch her into a public battle she never wanted. The letter was from the Archdiocese of Boston. It informed her that her ex-husband, Joseph P. Kennedy II, had formally petitioned the Catholic Church to have their 12-year marriage annulled. To a non-Catholic, the concept can be confusing. A religious annulment is not the same as a civil divorce. A divorce ends a legally valid marriage. An annulment is a declaration by the Church that a sacramentally valid marriage never existed in the first place. The Church teaches that for a marriage to be valid, both partners must enter into it with the proper intention, freedom, and psychological maturity. If the Church tribunal finds that one of these impediments was present at the time of the wedding, it can declare the union null. For Joe Kennedy, a man with clear political ambitions, to one day run for governor or senator, an annulment was crucial. It would allow him to remarry within the Catholic Church, which he wished to do with his new partner, Beth Kelly. A Catholic politician who was divorced and remarried outside the Church would be unable to receive communion, a significant political and personal liability. For Sheila, the petition was a profound and devastating blow. She was an Episcopalian, and in her faith and in her heart, her marriage had been real. It had been a sacred vow. It had produced 2 children. Now the church her ex-husband belonged to was considering declaring that this core part of her identity, this 12-year relationship that had given her her beloved sons, had been a kind of spiritual fraud from its inception. The grounds Joe cited for the annulment were lack of due discretion. Essentially, it claimed that at the time of their wedding in 1979, he was too psychologically immature to understand the full commitment of a Catholic marriage. To Sheila, this was an absurdity. He was 26 years old when they married, the founder of a major nonprofit. She saw it as a legal fiction, a convenient excuse. Her initial reaction was one of disbelief and deep personal pain. She wrote in her later book, Shattered Faith, "To have my marriage declared null would be to say that my sons were born of a union that was not a true marriage. I could not allow my sons to be told that their mothers and fathers' love for each other and for them was a fraud." This was the heart of her motivation. It wasn't about clinging to the Kennedy name or contesting the divorce. It was about protecting the integrity of her past and the legitimacy of her children's origins. In the eyes of God and the Church, she decided to fight. Initially, she tried to fight it privately, within the complex and arcane system of the Church's canon law. She wrote letters. She made her case to Church officials. But she quickly realized she was an outsider in a system designed to serve its own. She felt the immense weight of the Kennedy name and its influence within the heavily Irish Catholic Archdiocese of Boston. She felt that the outcome was predetermined. Realizing she could not win on the inside, she made a courageous and desperate decision. She would go public. In 1997, she published her book, Shattered Faith, A Woman's Struggle to Stop the Catholic Church from Annulling Her Marriage. The book was a bombshell. In calm, intelligent, and devastating prose, she laid out her entire story. She described her marriage, the divorce, and the shock of the annulment petition. She argued passionately that the annulment process was being abused by the wealthy and powerful, allowing them to conveniently dispose of inconvenient first marriages. She wrote, "I was being theologically dispossessed." It was a powerful phrase that perfectly captured her feeling of being erased. The book was a direct challenge not just to her ex-husband, but to the Catholic Church itself. She was a lone woman, a Protestant, taking on two of the most powerful institutions in America. The public reaction was intense. The story was everywhere. Many people, particularly ordinary Catholics, who had gone through their own difficult divorces, sympathized with Sheila. Her fight exposed the annulment process, which had long been a source of private pain and confusion for many, to the bright light of public scrutiny. It raised uncomfortable questions about whether there was one set of rules for the rich and powerful and another for everyone else. Despite the public outcry she generated, Sheila ultimately lost the official battle. The local tribunal in Boston granted the annulment. She appealed to the Roman Rota, the highest appellate court in the Vatican. In 1997, the Rota upheld the decision. Officially, in the eyes of the Catholic Church, Sheila Rauch's 12-year marriage to Joseph P. Kennedy II never existed. But by fighting, by writing her book, and by telling her story, Sheila had won a different, more lasting victory. She had refused to be silenced. She had ensured that her side of the story would forever be attached to his. The annulment controversy was a messy, public, and deeply personal affair that raised a number of difficult questions that are still debated today. The central controversy, of course, was the fairness of the annulment process itself. Was this a genuine case of a sacramentally invalid marriage, as the Church and Joe Kennedy maintained? Or was it, as Sheila and her supporters believed, an egregious example of wealth and influence manipulating a religious process for personal convenience? From the Church's perspective, the annulment was a purely theological matter concerning the sacramental nature of the wedding ceremony. Officials repeatedly stated that an annulment does not deny that a real relationship existed, nor does it render children illegitimate in the eyes of the Church or civil law. It is strictly about whether the conditions for a valid sacrament were present on the wedding day. The grounds of lack of due discretion or psychological immaturity were, and still are, one of the most common reasons for granting annulments. From Joe Kennedy's perspective, he was simply following the rules of his faith in order to remarry and remain in good standing with the Church. He maintained that it was a private religious matter that his ex-wife had unfairly dragged into the public sphere. But Sheila's argument resonated powerfully with the public. To the average person, the idea that a 12-year marriage that produced 2 children could be declared a nullity on a psychological technicality seemed like a form of sophisticated gaslighting. Her fight raised a fundamental debate about the nature of the institution itself. Was the Catholic Church a house of impartial spiritual judgment, or was it susceptible to the influence of a powerful political dynasty that had long been one of its most prominent American pillars? Another controversy revolved around Sheila's decision to go public. Was she justified in turning a private family matter into a public spectacle and a best-selling book? Some criticized her for airing her dirty laundry and embarrassing her children's father, but Sheila saw it as her only option. She was facing 2 monoliths, the Kennedy family and the Catholic Church. She believed that private resistance was futile. The only power she had was the power of her own story and the court of public opinion. She argued that she went public not for revenge, but for justice, and to shine a light on a process she believed was deeply flawed and hurtful to thousands of others. This was a classic case of an individual using the media to fight an asymmetrical battle against powerful institutions. The consequences of Sheila Rauch Kennedy's public stand were significant and long-lasting, rippling through the Kennedy family, the Catholic Church, and her own life. For Joseph P. Kennedy II, the political damage was severe. The annulment saga, laid bare in Sheila's book, was a public relations disaster. At the time, Joe was widely considered the leading candidate to run for governor of Massachusetts in 1998. The messy public feud with the mother of his children, however, severely tarnished his image. He came across as callous and willing to use his power to get what he wanted, while Sheila was widely seen as a sympathetic and principled victim. The scandal reinforced the negative Kennedy stereotypes of entitlement and ruthlessness. In August 1997, at the height of the controversy, Joe Kennedy shocked the political establishment by announcing that he would not run for governor, citing a new recognition of the difficult and sometimes painful burdens his family would have to bear. He never sought higher office again, retiring from Congress in 1999. Sheila's fight had effectively ended the political ambitions of an RFK heir. For the Catholic Church in America, the scandal was a major blow to its credibility. Sheila's story brought the annulment process out of the shadows and into the mainstream conversation. It led to widespread debate among American Catholics about the fairness, cost, and accessibility of annulments. Many felt that the process favored the wealthy and well-connected, and Sheila's case became the poster child for this perception. It sowed seeds of distrust and cynicism among the laity and put the American bishops on the defensive, forced to explain a complex canonical process that seemed to many to be unjust. But the most important significance lies in Sheila Rauch Kennedy's personal legacy. In a family famous for its powerful men and supportive, often silent women, Sheila broke the mold. She refused to be the quiet, discarded first wife. She defined herself not as a victim, but as a fighter. Her story became a powerful, if reluctant, feminist narrative. She used her intellect, her education, and her voice, the very things that had made her an outsider in the Kennedy world, as her weapons. She fought for the validity of her own life experience, for her own history, and in doing so, she gave a voice to countless other women who had felt silenced or erased by powerful men or institutions. Her sons, Joe III and Matthew, grew up to be successful, well-adjusted adults, a testament to her strength and dedication as a mother. Joe Kennedy III would go on to follow his father into Congress, a poised and respected politician, his career unburdened by the scandals of the previous generation, thanks in large part to the stable foundation his mother provided. Sheila had ensured that the next generation of Kennedys would have a history that included her, undeniable and intact. In the end, after the headlines faded and the controversy subsided, Sheila Rauch Kennedy did what she had always wanted to do. She retreated from the public eye and resumed her life as a private citizen, scholar, and mother. She continued her work in architectural history and urban planning, contributing her expertise to her community, far from the world of Washington politics and family dynasties. Her story is a powerful lesson in quiet resilience. She was a woman who entered a world that sought to define her, and when it tried to discard and erase her, she found the strength to redefine herself on her own terms. She may have officially lost her case in the Vatican's courts, but she won a much larger victory. She won the right to her own narrative. She ensured that whenever the story of Joseph P. Kennedy II is told, her name, her voice, and her struggle will be an inseparable part of it. Sheila Rauch Kennedy is not a tragic figure. She is a survivor. She is the Kennedy mother who refused to become a ghost. She fought for her truth against formidable odds, not with the bombast of a politician, but with the clear, determined voice of a scholar and the fierce, protective heart of a mother. And in doing so, she carved her own permanent, indelible place in the complicated, sprawling, and ever-fascinating history of the Kennedy family. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.